Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Leslie Courchesne. I'm CEO of the Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the Tri-Cities Chamber operates on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation. And we thank the Coquitlam who continue to live on these lands and care for them, along with the waters and all that is above and below. And I would also like to acknowledge the tragic loss of Coquitlam Councillor Stephanie Patterson. Our hearts are with the Coquitlam people at this very sad time. I would also like to acknowledge a few folks on the line before I introduce our presenters for today.
Hello.
So, if I could ask everyone to please mute themselves if you're not speaking in the first half of this meeting. Thank you so much. So you are joining us for the City of Coquitlam's Strategic Transportation Plan town hall hosted by the Tri-Cities Chamber. I'd like to acknowledge, I just don't see if he's joined us here yet, Mayor Richard Stewart. If he is on the line, welcome. I'd also like to acknowledge a few of the Tri-Cities Chamber's board of directors who have joined us today. I have my chair, Jennifer Wright, on the call. Jennifer McKinnon. I see Catherine Miller, director. Thank you for joining us. Pulkit Sharma, Adele Gamar, and Raihani Mirjani. And there's also a few of the Chamber Government Relations and Economic Development Committee members on the call, chaired by Adele Gamar, Hogan Song, Kevin Volz, Barry Seaton, and Sherry Mahar. Thank you so much for joining us. Did I miss any board members or committee members? Just raise your hand or wave if I did. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today. So we are going to begin with a presentation, and there will be time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. If something strikes you during, please do type your question into the chat. And at the end of the presentation, if you want to speak your question, you're welcome to raise your hand, and I'll do my best to take those questions in the order that they came in. So at this time, I would like to introduce from the City of Coquitlam, Doug McLeod, Director of Transportation, and Glen Chua, Transportation Planning Specialist. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. I really appreciate that. And thank you to the members of the Tri-City Chamber of Commerce here for taking time out of your day to let us explain where we're at with the Strategic Transportation Plan, provide some details and insights, and then have an opportunity to take questions and feedback. So next slide, please, Glenn. So why transportation matters? Obviously, transportation is key and integral to how a functioning city. And of course, Chambers of Commerce care about a functioning city because you care about the economic vitality of it. And so making sure that how our transportation system is designed, that it's safe, that we're addressing the climate action, that we're addressing the public health concerns, that it's really equitable and affordable for everyone, and that it supports a thriving economy that's moving goods and people efficiently matters. And this is why we're here today, to hear from you, because we want to get that, that opinion from the Chamber. So the first part of this, Glen is going to present on the kind of where we're at with the current strategic transportation plan, give you some of the details and background, some of the great insight into some of the great data-driven metrics that we did. I think you're going to find it very interesting because I'm sure you all appreciate the data and how it can drive business in some of these metrics. So I'm sure you'll probably take some good nuggets away, and then I'll take over and then kind of present where we're at, what we've done so far in terms of developing a vision and a goals that we've gone through council, and then we'll kind of feed off with some of the themes that derive from that, and then be able to take some questions on the entire process and any other transportation questions that you may have while we're here. So with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Glen.
All right, thanks, Doug. So I'm Glen Chua, the lead on this Strategic Transition Plan project. And I'll just give an overview of what this plan's about. And so This strategic transition plan, STP in short, is a plan that guides the priorities for the city's multimodal transportation network over the next 25 years and focuses on moving people and moving goods. And as part of this plan, there will be high-level policies and strategies, as well as an implementation and phasing plan to identify the near-term priorities for the next 10 years or so. So why is a new transportation plan needed? Our current version of the transportation plan was last updated over a decade ago in 2012. And since then, we've seen a lot of changes in the city, including the extension in 2016, also growth and development around the city, especially around its train stations. And then last year as well, the city adopted its environmental sustainability plan that has set out greenhouse gas emission reduction targets for the city to strive towards. We've also had changing demographics, including an aging population. The city has growing emphasis on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And also, we have seen emerging mobility trends such as increasing uptake of electric vehicles, e-bikes, e-scooters, and so on. And in the world of transportation engineering as well, we've also seen updates to best practices in street design. And last year, Translink was adopted its regional transportation strategy for Metro Vancouver region, Transport 2050, and as a city, we want to be integrated and aligned with them. So an overview of the project timeline. The process started on Canada Day last year, and it comprises 5 phases. First 2 phases have been completed, and it focused really on understanding the city's current transportation system, including the challenges and opportunities, and I'll give a brief recap of what we learned shortly. And right now, we're just about to wrap up the phase 3 visioning stage, and Doug will share more about that in a bit. And then subsequent to this phase, we'll have the phases 4 and 5, where we'll be developing long-term transportation network plans, policies, and actions to achieve the goals that we've identified in this phase 3. And then look at prioritizing the actions into short and long-term timeframes, and also develop a monitoring plan. All in all, we hope to finalize the new plan around the middle of next year. And this will also integrate a couple of ongoing projects by a couple of my colleagues, the road safety strategy and the e-mobility strategy that Doug will also touch on later on. So recapping some of the key insights from our engagement in the first 2 phases. We had engaged over 1,500 participants in the second half of last year, including with advisory committees and also with equity deserving groups such as visually impaired persons and recent immigrants. And a few of the key takeaways we heard were that people use a variety of modes to get around in Coquitlam. And there's a need for transportation planning and infrastructure to accommodate the different backgrounds and lived experiences, such as varying physical abilities and socioeconomic statuses. And we also heard a lot about concerns related to our transportation network. So for safety, we heard a lot about that, which deterred people from walking and cycling more. So not just for actual safety, but also perceived safety that are deterring people from making those trips. We also see a desire for more frequent and reliable transit service, and also heard quite a bit about high transportation costs, especially from the lower income population. So 2021, there's the census, which is held every 5 years, and this allows us to make a comparison with other municipalities in the region on commuting trips. And what we see here is that Coquitlam, so this all this shows the public transit and walking and cycling mode shares, what we call sustainable transportation modes. And so we see Coquitlam is about 13% public transit, 12.5% walking, cycling 0.5%. That's around 18% in total, and that's below the Metro Vancouver average. But above our peer Tri-Cities jurisdictions of Port Moody, which came in slightly below 16.5%, and Port Coquitlam at 12.2%. But people also travel for many other reasons other than commuting to work or post-secondary institutions. And so the city conducted a household travel survey in the last quarter of last year. And this was a statistically valid survey on how, when, where, and why Coquitlam residents were using our transportation system, really similar to the Translink Trip Diary survey that some of you may be familiar with, but specific to Coquitlam only. And we did this really to get more up-to-date data as the census was conducted right in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we wanted more up-to-date data to inform the transition planning process. And this survey will also cover all trip purposes and not just the commuting trips that the census covers. And you can see from the pie chart here that commuting trips took up a quarter of all trips, and then we have 24% of trips for social, recreation, and dining, and then 22% for shopping and personal business. And so the key takeaway is that we need to be planning a transportation system, not just around the commuting trips, but also for all trip purposes that our residents are taking. In the household travel survey, we also looked at the sustainable mode share for all trip purposes. And so on the left, you can see that public transit 11%, cycling 1.4%, and walking about 10%. Comes up to around 22% sustainable mode share. And so certainly you can see on the chart on the right, there's been progress increasing the sustainable transportation mode share over the years, but the pace is not fast enough for the city to meet its previous 2012 plan target of 30% sustainable mode share by year 2031. And in the survey as well, we also looked at the geographic variations and the sustainable mode shares across the different areas of the city. And we see that the areas around the SkyTrain station in city center and Coquitlam, we have about 28 to 30%, well above the Coquitlam average of 22%. Really reflects the benefits of transit-oriented development and having a mix of users that people can easily walk or cycle to. And in Mahavir Austin Heights, we have around 23%, just slightly above the city average. And the rest of the city and the rest of Southwest Coquitlam and Northeast Coquitlam in the more single-family detached houses, where there's a higher concentration of those, we see those areas seeing well below the citywide average, between 13 to 18%. In the survey, we also looked at the distribution of trips, where the trips are going. And so this trips pertains to vehicle trips. And we see that 43% of vehicle trips, they stay in Coquitlam, 13% go to Port Coquitlam, and 7% to Port Moody. So in total, about 63% of vehicle trips stay within the Tri-Cities region, and then the rest are beyond the region. And looking at bus passenger trips, 55% stay within Coquitlam, 12% to Port Moody, 5% to Port Coquitlam, and roughly 70% of bus trips stay within the Tri-Cities. Around 23% of the trips go to Burnaby. Most of them would take it to Lohit SkyTrain station to connect to the SkyTrain. And for SkyTrain and West Coast Express trips, we see here that more than half of them use that to go to Vancouver, North Shore, and beyond, and just 7% stay within Coquitlam. There's 4 stations in Coquitlam itself, so not just really reflects that as well. And in terms of the trip distances people are taking, not surprising, walking is the shortest distance, 1 kilometers. And then cycling micromobility, 8.1 kilometers, and vehicle trips are 9.2 kilometers. So pretty comparable in terms of average trip lengths for those two modes. And public transit, the longest distance really reflects the West Coast Express and SkyTrain trips to Vancouver and beyond, as shown on the previous slide. And when we drilled into the vehicle trips, the distribution of trips in terms of the lengths, we found that around 6 kilometers were less than 1.2 kilometers, around a 15-minute walk or so, and then 2/5 less than 5 kilometers, which is around 10 to 15 minutes by an e-bike, and less than 10 kilometers would be around 2/3, which is about 20 to 30 minutes by e-bikes. And this trips really show the potential for a lot of those to be converted from vehicle trips to e-bike or e-scooter trips. And so we had our GIS colleagues develop this interactive survey data visualization tool that really provides a rich data set we can really dig into and just look at the results of the survey when you have on free time. And the link's available on our project engagement website at letstalkcoquitlam.ca/transportation plan. And so before I pass it on to Doug to talk about the proposed vision, goals, and key themes, just want to provide a quick demographic context for Coquitlam today. You can see that Coquitlam grew a lot in the last decade to a population today of around 155,000. And by year 2050, we expect another 100,000 new residents or so, and the number of seniors will also more than double. And a lot of this expected growth would be taking place around the Sky train stations and also in Fraser Mills and the south of United Boulevard, and in Northeast Coquitlam.
Sorry, Glenn, I'm just getting a bit of feedback that some participants are having a bit of trouble hearing you. Can you just repeat that last sentence that you said there?
This one?
Or adjust, maybe adjust your mic a little bit? Yeah.
Okay, I will repeat this. Should I go back to the previous slide, or this slide is fine?
This slide is fine, but yeah,
Okay.
if you can try adjusting your mic or speaking a little louder or
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this map shows the expected distribution of the population growth up to year 2050, and we see that most of the population growth we expect to happen will be around the SkyTrain stations in Coquitlam, in city center in Coquitlam, as well as around Fraser Mills, south of United Boulevard, as well as northeast Coquitlam. Yeah, with that, I'll just turn it over to Doug to talk about the vision.
Thanks, Glenn. And yes, I hopefully everyone was able to hear most of what he said. But again, since it's on a recording, you can always go back and take a look at some of that important stats. So based on the information that we got from the early engagement, we started to build upon the feedback received, engagement that we had with stakeholders, and then come up with a vision and refine the revision that had been previously established through the 2012 plan. And so, as you can see here, in 2050, the idea is that Coquitlam is a complete and connected community. So that's really completing our network, completing sidewalks, completing road connections, completing cycling facilities, and making sure that all of the sub-regions are all connected within each other. Because as you can see from the data, people actually travel a lot in and about Coquitlam and in and about the Tri-Cities areas, right? There's a perception that a lot of people leave, but you saw that data that 25% of all trips are, commute purpose. So the other 75% of those trips, a lot of that is internally based, right? And so prioritizing sustainable movement, and we'll get a little bit more into how that overall impacts, but you can see that we need to do a lot of efforts in sustainable transportation. There's still a lot of work that we need to get to the goals. So we really need to put some focused effort on it. And what are the outcomes? Well, we'll get a thriving economy out of that, right? It's supporting good mobility, ensures that you have a good economy. People will be healthier if they're having more active transportation, and it'll be more equitable because all people will have more access to a wider variety of transportation options. And I think that's one of the key overall things to this, right? And how are we going to do it? With accessible infrastructure, safe and reliable transportation that supports it for all. So that's the intent behind all of the definition of the vision. Next slide, please. So to establish with a vision, we need to have some targets or goals, right? Because without any targets or goals, you're just kind of going around aimlessly, right? So in trying to have some alignment with other plans, we looked at best practices around the region and said, what we want to do is we want to target a sustainable mode share of 50% by 2050. Have zero GHG emissions from transportation, and then have a new target of zero serious traffic injuries and fatalities, which you may have heard of Vision Zero, which that's what Vision Zero is. It's this target of getting towards zero deaths or seriously injured on the road, and that's an important target to get to because you don't want to have your loved one impacted by just having to go out to the store, right? Next slide, please. So again, this aligns with what's happening around the region. Transport 2050, TransLink's regional transportation strategy, has a 50% mode share for Metro Vancouver. Coquitlam's environmental sustainability plan already has the zero GHG target, and the BC road safety strategy already has this Vision Zero. So we're essentially not really doing anything new. We're just collectively doing it in one place and identifying it for Coquitlam. Next slide, please. So what is that? The newest one is the 50% sustainable mode share. And I think really what's important to demonstrate is how impactful that really can be in terms of the overall transportation system. So what you're seeing here is like our current existing mode share, as Glen was saying, is around 78% vehicle driving. if we just kind of did business as usual, so we'd see some growth in sustainable transportation, but not really prioritizing it, that mode share would change. But what you're seeing is the overall number of trips, vehicle trips on the road would increase substantially. And that puts a tremendous amount of pressure on the transportation network. It's really hard for us to widen and create so many new roads. And I don't know if that's really what we want to really have a good, thriving economy. Because again, you've seen examples all throughout North America, building lots more roads doesn't necessarily translate into the results that people expect it to. But whereas if we target a 50% mode share, it's basically the same amount of traffic that we have today, right? And so that way we still accommodate the people who need to drive. There are probably a number of you on this call who, can't reasonably take transit or walk or bike to work, right? You probably have got meetings all over, you got clients to meet, it doesn't work. We don't want you to not drive, right? I want to make sure that you have a world where you can drive and it's actually easy and reliable and not more congested. And that's where this idea of having the 50% mode share really can be this, balance between sustainable mode shares and still accommodating vehicles on the road. Next slide, please. Of course, as Glen was alluding to and demonstrated, the 50% is not, we're not trying to say the entire city needs to be 50% in every single zone, because that doesn't make sense. Having greater access to transit, having greater access to amenities is going to lead to higher propensities to sustainable mode share. So we've done a draft target mode share by sub area. So you can see that certain areas will actually even have higher sustainable mode shares, because we know that there's going to be great access to amenities, great access to transit in Coquitlam and Coquitlam Center. Whereas we know that Coquitlam Northwest, Northeast, it's not going to be as easy, but we still need to see a big change to get to this overall 50% mode share target. Next slide, please. So after doing the goals and the targets, we've group things into themes about what we need to target and prioritize in our objectives through the STP. And so the 5 are safety and accessibility for all, complete and connected communities, sustainable and innovative mobility, a reliable transportation network, and fast and frequent transit. So we'll go to the first one, safety and accessibility for all. And so again, as I alluded to, that's really adopting Vision Zero. I'll mention a little bit later on, but as part of the road safety strategy, we've already presented to council on this, and that having a Vision Zero is something that they're really willing to support. And it really means about prioritizing our most vulnerable road users. Because again, that's where we're seeing the highest propensity of injuries is vulnerable road users, which are pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, right? People who have, when you get into a collision with a vehicle, you're going to have highly negative consequences. We're seeing that car manufacturers, they're making cars safer when you impact another vehicle, right? So we're seeing those type of injuries go down, but we're seeing the injuries with vulnerable road users increase. So it's really about making something that's far more safe for all road users. And of course, accessible for all. If you design a transportation system that is inclusive for people with physical disabilities, such as visual impairment or needing mobility aids, you make it really good for people who are really mobile. So why not just design it for that? Because you're just going to get a better overall transportation system. And again, that makes sure that it's equitable and accessible for all. Next slide, please. So complete and connected communities. As I mentioned, working closely with our colleagues in our planning department and through the land use planning, making sure that there's communities that have access to a number of amenities that make you feel really connected into your neighborhood, so that you don't have to travel far distances for certain things. You still can, there'll still be some things that you'll need to travel further distances, but the more amenities you have closer to you, the shorter your travel distances for the vast majority of trips, and the more likelihood that you're going to not need your vehicle and not desire to take your vehicle. And then, of course, the next one, and when we're doing complete streets, is really recognizing that there's zones for all different types of users. And as you can see in the slide here, we have, we've consistently had a pedestrian zone and a vehicle zone, but now as we have this increasing trend of micromobility, which covers cyclists, scooters, and then e-bikes and e-scooters and all sorts of other motorized wheel devices, we need to have a separate zone, because really they can operate between 15 to 30 kilometers an hour. And that's, quite a significant speed differential between pedestrian zones. So really having designated zones for all of those types of users will help promote that use and encourage it, and make sure that people feel safe and comfortable in all those types of zones, because again, lots of people who are very comfortable and avid cyclists are very comfortable riding in vehicle zones. But again, through our survey results, we clearly heard loud and clear that a lot of people would want to cycle more if they had a micromobility zone, but they don't, and so they don't feel comfortable riding in the vehicle zone. Next slide, please. So sustainable and innovative mobility. So really this theme is all around making sure that we're capturing all of this new wave of technology and change in transportation. Transportation has evolved so much in the last 12 to 13 years. It's unbelievable, and really being able to be on top of it with all of the different technological solutions and being adaptable so that as new ones come aboard, we can easily entertain them. So things like mobility hubs, where people can come and find all sorts of different type of transportation options. That's something we want to continue to support. Urban logistics, as we know, as Coquitlam develops, as the Coquitlam Town Center develops, it's going to get harder and harder to find loading zones for big trucks, but yet there's probably going to be even more freight impacts as there's going to be more economic activity because there's more residents and you want to have more of that economic activity. So using things like cargo bites for this kind of freight delivery can really help transform and make these places thrive. And of course, the whole movement around electric vehicles and transitioning ourselves out of internal combustion engines and making sure that there's reliable access to EV charging, because not everyone has home-based charging. A lot of people cannot, or they're not able or cannot afford to change their home-based charging because they maybe don't live in a single-family home, or they live in a strata that doesn't allow it. So providing these type of facilities can help enable and expand the overall adoption for EV charging for those people who really do need to drive. And of course, things like ride hail, ride share also are encapsulated under this innovative mobility theme. Next slide, please. And of course, we can't ignore the fact that we still have to maintain and operate the transportation network. So having a theme focused around reliable transportation network, using our traffic management center and intelligent transportation solutions, such as real-time cameras and monitoring devices that can provide information systems out onto the roadways about where road closures are or where the railway crossing is happening, for example. All of that type of stuff can really help manage our transportation network. Recognizing curb space is also a valuable component of our transportation network, and managing that appropriately and correctly. Because again, when you have your businesses, and let's say some of you have access to storefronts, and you want that high turnover from both vehicles and bikes and shared services and loading, you're going to want to have that curb space well managed. And so having a good management and good strategy behind that is important. And of course, just the regular maintenance and not just paving, but sweeping and snow maintenance, snow clearing for all types of different facilities is an important component of having that reliable transportation network, so that you just can use your network without really having to think about it. And finally, next slide, please. Fast and frequent transit, knowing how what a critical component of transit is for sustainable transit and our overall mode shares, really focusing on advocating new corridors for frequent transit, potential SkyTrain and rapid transit expansion, and regional connections, such as, finally having transit service connection to one of our biggest neighbors, Surrey. So out of all the strategic transportation plan, there's going to be a couple of sub-strategies. And these sub-strategies are really about taking elements that's embedded within the strategic transportation plan and focusing it more on just that single component. So currently under development already is the e-mobility strategy. And the e-mobility strategy is really about the electric mobility. And again, many other cities have a very electric vehicle focused strategy, but really this is all about electric mobility, which includes e-bikes and e-scooters. So really this will, help us find all of the different prioritized objectives and our plans and targeted actions to help us be able to have more access and more use of e-mobility, e-vehicles and e-bikes. So establishing more EV charging stations, as I mentioned before, new development requirements, helping some of those existing stratas convert and provide EV access and provide e-bike and other e-mobility solutions. Next slide, please. And then, of course, the road safety strategy, as I mentioned, that's also underway, and that will really help establish that vision for a new culture of road safety in Coquitlam. Not that we don't have one already, but to further enhance it, improve, and really leveraging what's called a safe systems approach. And that safe systems approach is a wide range, is recognizing that you cannot just do one particular thing for road safety. There's lots of different elements. There's what Coquitlam does. There's the RCMP. There's bylaw enforcement. There's land use planning. There's the people who actually drive the vehicles, the users of the transportation system. We have to all work collectively together, not individually, because you'll get a better result when working all together. And I think that's really the essential elements of that safe systems approach is recognizing what everyone else is doing, collaborating, and finding ways that we can continue to improve upon it with this overarching goal of eventually achieving Vision Zero. We know it's not easy. It might seem very lofty and ambitious, but really accepting death as a consequence of using our transportation network doesn't sound really reasonable when you say it out loud, but it's something that we've just kind of historically done for a long period of time. And we know that it can be done. Other cities around the world have actually done this. They've adopted Vision Zero and they've dedicated the necessary efforts and they've achieved a year of zero deaths. And so that's amazing, right? And so I think that's something that we should target, knowing that it is challenging and there will be change associated with getting to it, but it's recognizing that, again, you don't want your loved one or your friend or your colleague having lost their life just by simply transporting themselves from home to the grocery store. Next slide, please. So where we're at currently is we've wrapped up our phase 3 online survey, but we're continuing to get engagement through meeting with stakeholders such as you guys. And then what we want to do next is develop short-term 2030 goals, because it's great to have 2050 goals, but 2050 goals, that's 27 years away. We want to have something a little bit more near and dear to everyone's heart so that we can see and measure our progress and feel something that's more tangible in that delivery and getting towards our 2050 steps. So that will be our next phase, the phase 4, the planning and actually coming up with some proposed solutions. So with that, that concludes our presentation. So Glenn and I are here to answer questions. Leslie is offered to help moderate, and I'll answer what I can. And Glenn, as the project manager, will help to answer any of the ones that I do not know.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Doug and Glenn, for the high-level overview. I know that Mayor Stewart has now joined the call, I believe, and wanted to say a few words before we go into the Q&A portion. So over to you, Mayor Stewart.
Well, it wasn't so much that I wanted to say a few words. Leslie asked me to, and I'm honored to. I thank everyone for participating. The strategic transportation plan is a key part of where the city has to go. We need to, as a region, accommodate 1 million people, and not because we want them to come, but because they're coming, and they will be here in the next 20 years. We can just to allow at today's car ownership rates, which would be about 600,000 cars for 1 million people, just to allow enough space to park them, we would have to pave an area the size of Port Coquitlam if everybody ends up using vehicles the way we currently use them. So we have to break down, move back away from our reliance on automobiles. At the beginning of COVID, I gave up my car. It's an electric car, and my son uses it now. I went straight to an electric bike. I found that you can actually get around everywhere you need to go in a community, generally speaking. Even at 64 years old, and with a broken back from a car accident years ago, we can do this. But it does require us. I'm fine in as a road warrior among the traffic, but there's lots of folks that would be. My wife, for example, absolutely loves to be able to drive in a dedicated bike lane, ride her bike in a dedicated bike lane where she feels safer, and it really is a much more conducive environment for someone who's more casual user of bikes and other micromobility solutions and public transit. We need to get our society off the addiction of the automobile for everything. There's lots of other options, and I thank our staff for putting together this program to identify the citizens' views and the businesses' views of how we take transportation for the next 20 years. And I thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So to all attendees, you're welcome to use the raise hand function if you wish to speak your question, or you can type it into the chat, either a direct message to me or just to the whole group, and I will do my best to get these in the right order. I did receive one over text, so I'll go to that first and then to Zachary second. So the question is, what is the proposed funding plan for the needed infrastructure?
It's a great question. So that is part of the next phase is to identify what the targeted actions and what the cost and what the funds will need to be raised to address all of those solutions. Of course, what we do want to do is find the mixed bag and try and find that some will be lower cost solutions that we can get like the early wins and early steps into making some of the changes, and some will be the higher cost solutions because of just the circumstances involved. So we want to try and find that balance so that it's pragmatic and affordable, but recognizing that there will be some cost implications associated with this.
Thank you. And when I think about costs and transportation and projects related, sometimes I don't know where the city ends and TransLink begins. And so the next question is actually from Zachary at TransLink. So over to you. Oh, sorry, we can't hear you.
My apologies. How are we now? Good?
Good.
All right, excellent. So thank you for the presentation. It's really great to see the advancements that are underway and really just the recognition of the need to adjust our strategy around transportation in general. So I happen to work with TransLink's transportation demand management team, and one of our key efforts, which some of you on the call may be familiar with, is around encouraging employers to provide transit benefits to staff. And as we've gone through the process of trying to find ways to encourage employers to provide those benefits, there's oftentimes the challenge of having the available funding to do so, since transit is in this country a taxable benefit, and there aren't too many incentives on the provincial level to provide transit passes to staff. I'm curious to know if there is ever, or if there will be at some point, any kind of a grant opportunity or some type of incentive on this municipal level to provide seed funding to employers that want to invest in transit benefits, but may not necessarily be able to do so.
Thanks, Zachary. That's a really good question. I know it's challenging on a municipal level because, of course, we've got such a broad portfolio that we're already having to invest and support in. So typically, usually it's the other way around. We're looking to senior levels of government for seed funding for a variety of programs that we can then try to manage or facilitate and encourage, right? So I would say it's probably unlikely that we would be recommending to council to support a seed program for something like transit passes. It's not to say that we can't or won't, but you know, and there are always exceptions to the rule. I can think of a couple cities that actually supported some of the grant funding for e-bikes. And so you could see something like that. But again, I think municipalities in generally are going to look to leverage to the senior levels of government, like TransLink and like the province, who have a greater capacity and have a greater overall benefit by having these targeted programs, right? It's a very challenging burden to place onto municipalities. I see Mayor Stewart's putting up a note on his monitor there. So yeah, I think that's probably where we would go with that. But but that's a great point. You're right. I think those type of incentives can really make great strides into creating a transit culture at employers by providing those benefits and providing easier access. Again, you know, it's one of those things. If you can get a nice, inexpensive, we should ask TransLink for that grant funding. Yes, yeah, we have. So I think those type of incentives though can really make a big difference when you provide that access. And sometimes it's all of a sudden it's like if you have access to an Evo membership, all of a sudden you start using Evo and you're like, this is the easiest thing I've ever done. Why do I need 3 cars? I can go down to 1 car, right? Or it's those type of things, but it's getting that culture and getting that access to it. So you're absolutely right. Having access to transit passes would definitely help. And Leslie, I do want to talk about the overall funding. You're right, that looking to other governments and senior levels of governments is something that we would continue to do throughout all of our infrastructure requirements. So as a quick TransLink 101, we actually already partner very closely with TransLink through their capital cost sharing program. They have a number of different programs that we leverage for bicycle infrastructure through major road network. They provide annual operation and maintenance rehabilitation funding for the road network. So this is like your major roads that are being repaved are with TransLink money. So we already do those type of things. We apply to the province for active transportation grants. So we'll continue to leverage that as much as possible through all of the new infrastructure that we need to support the SDP, but recognize that a lot of these capital cost sharing programs are cost sharing. So there's a city component that we need to bring to the table. So that's where we'll have to come forward with what our new ask is. You're getting a preview of it, Mayor.
Understood. And I thought my filter was working so that signs from our mayor would be blurred, but he seemed to get it through that second time. So anyway, okay, over to Catherine Miller for her question. Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks, Leslie, and thanks for bringing this presentation together today. It's great. I am so fortunate to be a Coquitlam resident. I have 3 teenagers and they go to school in Port Coquitlam and Port Moody. What kind of work is being done with the other cities to increase transportation between the 3 cities, all through the Tri-Cities, to the various parks, recreation centers, and the schools?
That's a great question, and something that Mayor and Council brought up as well. So we continue to work very closely with our colleagues in Port Moody and Port Coquitlam. Port Coquitlam is undergoing an update to their master transportation plan at the same time, which is great. So we can definitely make sure that there's a lot of alignment, make sure that there's alignment with major projects, and of course, like just making sure some of the simple stuff we're making sure that we do, which is, if we have a bike route on our corridor, you have it on the corresponding corridor on your side, right? So, because obviously you don't have a route that leads to nowhere. So it's starting with those simple things, but we definitely work together. Of course, because we're all different municipalities, priorities are different. So that's where the biggest struggle is like what might be very important in Port Moody might not be quite as important in Coquitlam. Doesn't mean it's not as important. It's just maybe not in terms of relative scale. So we're trying to align ourselves as much as possible where we can. So I can think of Thermal and Moray, for example. I know it's near and dear to both of our hearts. So we are collaborating on something like that. So making overall road safety improvements to that corridor, for example.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, the cooperation between the cities and villages in the Tri-Cities region is critical. And I know that transportation planning, strategic planning sometimes doesn't always align across. So making sure that it's as coordinated as possible is so appreciated by the residents of the Tri-Cities. I know I happen to live in Port Moody, but I think my family, as like my kids were growing, we spent a lot of time in Coquitlam parks, Port Coquitlam parks, rec facilities, you name it. And so it's just a wonderful place to live, and many of us just flow between the communities all the time. So related to Catherine's question, I have another submitted question here. How is this plan addressing children and youth travel safe and active in brackets?
Yeah, so that has actually come up quite a bit in our road safety strategy engagement. And so without totally giving away a certain outcome out of that, it is highly likely that we'll be looking to reestablish and redevelop a some sort of school safe routes to school travel program, name to be determined, but definitely doing something along those lines that really encourage and create a whole culture around sustainable transportation and feeling safe sustainable transportation to and from schools throughout the entire children and youth. I think other things that we can say that will help address children and youth are really encouraging that safe micromobility and safe walking facilities, because we know that obviously many youth don't have access to driving, so they're taking transit and they're walking and they're wanting to use e-bikes and e-scooters. So making sure that we have those dedicated facilities and having a comprehensive network that gets you from from anywhere to everywhere is what I like to say. So that's really the idea, is because I don't know where anyone wants to go, and I don't want to know. I want just to be able to give a network that gives you the most amount of options, so that you can just free to choose what the device you're taking and what route you're taking. And so I think that will help address some of that children and youth. But I think through the whatever we do with the school travel planning program, that'll be far more targeted, very closely working with School District 43 on that.
Wonderful. Next, if I could ask you to comment on business and commercial zones, of course, the flow of traffic, foot traffic, car traffic, micro mobility, everything in between is very important to our member businesses. Can you address some of the issues that you've identified and how potential solutions might be looked at?
Yeah, so the curbside the curbside management strategy, that's a component of our citywide parking review, I think is going to be one of the largest benefits for goods movement and the Tri-City Chamber of Commerce members. Because what it'll help us do is come up with a very detailed plan and present to council of some of the difficult trade-offs with curb space. Like I alluded to, it is a very valuable asset. Many cities have, historically, done a decent job managing it, but really to go in depth managing it means you have to do an investment in what you're doing and actually make some difficult decisions and trade-offs, right? Because again, there's a limited amount of it, and it's very valuable, and that value is going to be different for different purposes. A lot of the members, I'm sure, are going to want, I need my loading zones. I've got deliveries. I've got, Amazon. I've got my Summit Logistics, whatever. They're all coming and they're giving me deliveries. I need to have that space for it. We're also going to look at it and go, well, we also know that there's rideshare and ride hail. You're going to want your customers to get to and from your sites, right? And we know that you're going to want some high turnover parking. You don't want your employees parking there for 2 hours and just moving their car down the road. That's not a very efficient use of the curb space. Catherine smiling because you know that you've probably seen this before. So it's these type of things that we want to try and have a good solution on, so that we can effectively and reasonably manage. Because what you're going to see, and what our hopes and aspirations, as we see more and more micromobility users, they're also going to have more of a demand for curb space and curbside parking. And that's going to also come with great benefits, because you're going to have even more access to customers. Again, a number of studies have shown that people are more likely to actually do what we call pass-by trips when you're on a bike, because it's a heck of a lot easier to park a bike, run in, grab a coffee, and get back on your bike than it is to park your car, right? So you'll see even more of that, which is great. But if we don't provide the parking, you won't get that activity. So again, and that all comes at a trade-off. So hopefully I answered that question around that. But yeah, I can't say that we have a solution right now, but we know we need to address it. We're already thinking about some of the different alternatives, and we know that it's going to come with some of those trade-offs, but we're willing to demonstrate and show it to Mayor and Council and have that those practices adopted and then implemented.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So to our attendees, we're closing in on the last 10 minutes here. So do submit your questions in chat or raise your hand if you have one. My next question is, I have been at council meetings and speaking with developers. Some of the high-rise developments in particular going in Coquitlam are being purposely built with less parking spots than there are units intentionally, and there is concern, of course, that it means residents with cars will just sprawl out and spread all over the streets and perhaps take up that precious commercial parking or elsewhere. So any comments on how this is going to work, and if you don't build it, if they won't bring their cars, type of approach?
Yeah. So and Glen, maybe I might need your support on what the exact dates are here, but we previously went to council regarding a reduction in parking rates in and around transit zones for Coquitlam, and I think it was called the Evergreen Line zones. And the rationale behind that is there's been substantial research through Metro Vancouver and elsewhere that car ownership in high density transit oriented areas is lower. It's just demonstratively lower. People do basically do what the mayor does and go, I will live either car light as a family. So if there's 3 of you in your family, you have 1 car, or you might just say, I don't even need a car because I have access to Evo or Moto and I've got good transit and I'm going to take my e-bikes for the other trips. So that demonstrated benefit is something that we've presented to Mayor and Council. They adopted, and that's those new rates that are being applied to those developments in those areas. So you're absolutely right. If people are hearing from developers that they're not providing 1 stall per unit, that is exactly right. But what that does is that also helps the housing affordability crisis, because we know that what developers, they're in to make money, right? Like, that's what the economy does. And they're going to translate those costs to the end user. So they can actually make housing more affordable by not passing that cost on and saying, if you're comfortable not owning a parking stall, you don't need to, and then you can get a unit for cheaper. And that's one of the great things, that it's a good trade-off. The biggest challenge, of course, is it's a transition period, right? Of course, as we advocate for more transit, once we get more transit, there'll be less impacts. But with having only the Evergreen Line, it can be a bit of a challenge, because there might not be everyone in the family that wants or can take the SkyTrain to their place of work. They may work in Poco or down in United Boulevard and live in Coquitlam, and we know that taking transit between those 2 areas is not actually really easy, even though they're not very far apart. So that's something that we continue to work with and advocate for TransLink, using the demonstrated data from the household travel survey to show, like, hey, this is not just about getting people out of the Tri-Cities area. People actually commute within the Tri-Cities area. So if you give us better transit within the Tri-Cities area, we'll meet more of your targets. So, Glen, did I miss anything there?
Just to add on, so car share is really also another key component of our strategy to in terms of like just catering to people who need access to a car from time to time. And we see that from our first model car share vehicle that was brought into Coquitlam in 2015, they've grown to a fleet of over 20 vehicles today, and they are looking to expand even further. And in the next year or so, it may be another 10 vehicles or so. So really staying strong demand there. And when we see our household travel survey, we also had a question about the car share membership. Percentage of persons with car share membership is really reflected in a higher proportion of people in the city center and Coquitlam, around 6.5 to 6.7% of people have car share memberships. And in fact, we also asked a question about vehicle ownership, and we actually see that in Coquitlam, around close to 14% of households are vehicle free. They do not own a car, and also in city center around 11%. So maybe we provide people options to close the transit with car share options. People can choose not to own a car and just access from time to time when they need one.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Glen.
Thank you. Maybe there's time for this one last question before any closing comments from yourselves and possibly Mayor Stewart, if he wishes. And that is looking to the future. So I know you've got the sort of shorter term vision, but this is also a transportation plan that goes out decades. And we've all seen some quite fantastic glimpses on the news of what some futuristic transportation modes could be. Are you planning drone taxi landing pads and other such Jetsons type amazing things for the future, or is it just too early to know decades out what we might be looking at?
I would say it's a bit more of a bit too early to know, but I think that's that whole innovative mobility theme. That's really us trying to capture and as much as reasonably possible be able to accommodate newer technologies and being more flexible and resilient for those, because I think that's the thing that the big lessons learned over the last few years is that transportation was cars for so long, right? And a bit of transit, and then all of a sudden it was like micromobility devices, and all of a sudden autonomous vehicles, and we were a bit caught off guard. And I think we're all trying to play catch up and be a bit more flexible and adaptable for this. So to say that we're going to definitely plan for drone taxis zones, not entirely sure yet. I'm sure there's a lot of hoops to cover through those regulations, but definitely things like connected vehicles. So your vehicles are actually, if anyone who's driving a relatively newer vehicle, you would be surprised to know just how smart your vehicle actually is. So, but it can't be smart if it's not communicating with anything. So cities build the infrastructure for the car to communicate with it. And so it can do things like know that a red light's up ahead, or again, we can say we've closed the signal due to a collision, take this alternate route and it'll divert you. So that's the type of innovation technology. I think that's kind of in that probably next 15 to 20 year time frame. So but yeah, you never know. Maybe things advance even quicker. So yeah.
Fair.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you both so kindly. Any closing comments from yourselves before I wrap things up?
Just to express the appreciation for this opportunity to present, and great questions, and hopefully this was very valuable feedback. Again, encourage you to go to our website if you've got more questions. Glenn, if you can pop that in the chat box for everyone so you can see where we're at and stay participated, sign up so you can get more information when we dive into the action plans, because I know that typically that's where we start to really see a lot of interest is, the devil's in the details. So when we start getting into those details, that's where people really start to really chime in and feel participation. So again, thank you for this opportunity, and would be happy to come back and present again on this if the membership would like, or other things. In my previous life with Surrey, I presented the Surrey Board of Trade numerous times, so I would love to have that opportunity if you guys are interested, because it usually is a pretty interesting topic for chambers of commerce. So
absolutely, and we appreciate the partnership. We're happy to host topics of interest to our chamber members anytime.
awesome.
Mayor Stewart, any closing comments before I wrap things up?
Well, I will say that I'm shocked that you even know anything about the Jetsons. There is no question that these are brave times. They're brand new, and we're all learning as life evolves, and as Uber came in and they were called a disruptor because it truly did change the way people hire vehicles, and we're going to see the same thing in so many ways as we move forward through the next decade. And all of us are trying to catch up, and some of us are trying to do it on a bike. So let's work together, and I thank very much the Chamber of Commerce for participating in this important work.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for attending. I will just give mention to a few of our other upcoming events. On September 14th, we have our Mayor's Barbecue with all 5 of our local mayors as a speaker panel, followed by delicious food at the Port Moody City Hall and Galleria. We also have on September 18th a virtual chamber talk with MP Benita Zarillo on federal procurement policies and process. And we have on September 21st our Women in Business Fall Mixer Harvest Moon event at the Boathouse in Port Moody. So I hope to see you soon. Thank you all for attending. And if you do have follow-up questions or comments, please do reach out to me or to the team at City of Coquitlam through the link provided in the chat. Thank you everyone for attending.